We thought he was joking, a prank. For sure it had to be. We could not be more wrong. The sun bled crimson across the peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains as Garrett Morse adjusted his pack straps, trying to ignore the unease crawling up his spine. They were 7 miles into the wilderness, following a trail that hadn't seen maintenance in years, and something about the dying light made the forest seem hungry. "We should have started earlier," muttered Silas Rourke, swatting at mosquitoes that swarmed in the humid mountain air. His red beard was already damp with sweat despite the cooling temperature. The insects seemed wrong somehow. Too large, too aggressive, their buzzing pitched at a frequency that made Garrett's teeth ache. "Quit whining," Vera Hutchins called back, her athletic frame navigating the rocky path with practiced ease. "The campsite's only another mile. We'll make it before full dark." But even she glanced nervously at the shadows gathering between the pines, shadows that seemed to move independently of the dying breeze. Behind them, Dalton Kemp stumbled over a root, cursing as he caught himself against a pine trunk. The bark came away under his palm, revealing wood underneath that was black and rotting, crawling with pale grubs that scattered at his touch. "This was supposed to be a relaxing weekend," he groaned, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses and wiping his palm frantically on his jeans. Garrett said nothing, but that crawling sensation intensified. 28 years of life had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now they screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with this place. The birds had stopped singing an hour ago. Even the ever-present mosquitoes seemed to be thinning out, as if fleeing something. The very air felt thick, contaminated, like breathing through wet gauze. The trees here were wrong too, he realized. Twisted into shapes that hurt to look at directly, branches growing in spirals that defied natural growth patterns. Some bore fruit that looked like human organs, pulsing wetly in the dim light. The trail itself seemed to be leading them somewhere specific, despite its apparent abandonment. 2 convenient turns, 2 perfect clearings, as if the path had been designed to funnel them towards something waiting in the darkness ahead. The trail curved around a massive granite boulder, and Vera stopped so abruptly that Silas nearly collided with her. "What the hell?" she whispered. 50 feet ahead, where the trail widened into a small clearing, stood a figure. At first, Garrett's mind tried to process it as another hiker, but the details refused to coalesce into anything that made sense. The thing wore what might have once been a clown costume, but time and something else, something deliberate, had transformed it into an abomination. The fabric hung in tatters, revealing skin underneath that was the wrong color, a mottled gray-white like a corpse pulled from deep water. But it was the face that made Garrett's bowels turn to ice water. The white grease paint was cracked and peeling, revealing raw flesh beneath that wept a clear fluid. The red smile painted across its mouth extended far beyond the natural corners of its lips, carved or cut into the cheeks themselves, the wounds crawling with tiny white things that might have been maggots or might have been teeth. The nose, once perhaps a cheerful red ball, had been replaced with what looked like a tumor, purple-black and pulsing with visible veins that extended up into its forehead, like a network of diseased rivers. Its eyes were the worst, completely black as if the pupils had hemorrhaged and spread to consume everything. But deep in those dark pools, shapes moved and writhed like things trapped under ice. The thing stood perfectly still, arms hanging at impossible angles, as if its joints had been broken and reset incorrectly. In one hand, it held something that caught the dying light, a length of wire perhaps, or a garrote, stained with substances that gleamed wetly. Around its feet, the grass had died in a perfect circle, leaving only bare earth that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent heartbeat. "Back up," Garrett whispered, his voice barely audible, slowly. But Dalton, always the skeptic, took a step forward. "It's just some freak trying to scare us. Probably some mountain man gone nuts. Hey, asshole, Halloween's not for another." The clown moved. There was no wind-up, no telegraphing of intent. One moment it stood motionless. The next, it sprinted toward them with a lurching, broken gait that covered ground with terrifying speed. Its mouth opened, not in a scream, but in a silent, yawning chasm that revealed teeth filed to points, rows upon rows of them like a shark's, extending back into its throat in a spiral pattern that seemed to go on forever. "Run!" Garrett roared. They scattered. Vera and Silas crashed through the underbrush to the left, while Dalton stumbled backward and fell. Garrett grabbed his friend's arm, hauling him to his feet as the clown thing bore down on them. They plunged into the forest to the right, branches tearing at their faces and clothes. Behind them came the sound of pursuit, not footsteps exactly, but a wet, slapping sound like raw meat being dragged across stone, accompanied by a chittering noise that might have been laughter, or might have been the sound of something eating. Dalton's breathing came in panicked gasps. His foot caught on a root, and he went down hard, glasses flying into the darkening forest. "I can't see!" "Garrett, I can't!" The wire went around Dalton's throat before Garrett could react. The clown had materialized from the shadows like a piece of night-given form, moving with impossible silence despite its broken gait. It pulled the wire tight with savage efficiency, and Dalton's words became a strangled gurgle. Garrett grabbed a fallen branch and swung it at the creature's head. It connected with a wet crunch, but the clown didn't even flinch. Those black eyes turned to Garrett, and up close, he could see things moving in them, like maggots, but wrong, swimming in the dark fluid of its gaze. They had tiny faces, he realized, with horror, miniature human faces that screamed silently as they writhed in the creature's ocular fluid. Dalton's hands clawed at the wire, his face purpling, eyes bulging. The wire bit deeper, and suddenly there was blood. So much blood, spurting in arterial jets across the forest floor. The clown's painted smile never wavered as it sawed through Dalton's windpipe, through muscle and tendon, until the wire met vertebrae with a sound like a violin string snapping. Dalton's head lolled at an impossible angle, nearly severed, held on by strips of meat and skin. His body convulsed once, twice, then went still. But even in death, his eyes continued to move, tracking Garrett's horrified face with an intelligence that shouldn't exist in a corpse. Garrett ran. He crashed through the darkness, branches whipping his face, leaving bloody tracks across his cheeks. His mind couldn't process what he'd seen, refused to process it. That couldn't have been real, couldn't have happened. The forest around him seemed to shift and change. Paths appearing and disappearing, trees rearranging themselves like pieces on a board. A scream echoed through the forest. Vera's voice, high and terrible, cut off abruptly. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off trees that shouldn't be there, echoing from clearings that existed only in peripheral vision. Garrett changed direction, heading toward where he thought the trail might be. His foot splashed into a stream he didn't remember crossing earlier. The water was warm, body temperature, and when he looked down, he saw it wasn't water at all, but something red and viscous that clung to his boots like syrup. The moon had risen, casting everything in silver and shadow, but the shadows moved wrong, reaching toward him with grasping tendrils. Then, from somewhere to his left, Silas's voice, "Garrett? Vera? Where are you guys?" Garrett wanted to call out, but something made him hesitate. The voice was right, but there was something underneath it, a wet quality like someone speaking with a mouthful of blood. He crept toward the voice, staying low, using trees for cover. Through a gap in the pines, he saw Silas standing in a small clearing, his headlamp cutting a cone of light through the darkness. "Guys, this isn't funny," Silas continued, turning in a slow circle. But his movements were too mechanical, too precise, like a marionette controlled by inexpert hands. "I found the trail. We need to." The clown emerged from directly beneath the ground. It erupted from the earth like something birthed from a nightmare, soil cascading from its grotesque form. The ground hadn't been disturbed. There was no hole, no depression. It simply materialized from the solid earth, as if the boundary between matter and void meant nothing to it. Before Silas could scream, the creature's hands, too long, fingers bent at too many joints, seized his jaw and the back of his head. With a motion like someone opening a particularly stubborn jar, it twisted. The crack of Silas's neck breaking echoed through the forest like a gunshot. But the clown didn't stop. It kept twisting, the skin of Silas's neck stretching, tearing, blood vessels bursting like overripe fruit. Silas's eyes rolled back, showing only whites as his head continued its impossible rotation. 180 degrees, 270, 360. The spine grinding and splintering inside the flesh. At 540 degrees, the skin gave way entirely. The head came free with a wet, tearing sound, trailing strands of meat and nerve endings like party streamers. Silas's body dropped, blood fountaining from the ragged stump of his neck, painting the clearing in arterial spray. The clown held the head up to its face, those black eyes studying it with what might have been curiosity, its painted smile widening impossibly. Then it turned directly toward Garrett's hiding spot and winked. Garrett ran again, crashing through the underbrush, no longer caring about stealth. The forest had become a maze of horrors, every shadow potentially concealing another nightmare. His foot caught on something soft and yielding. He went down hard, hands sinking into something wet and warm. Vera, or what remained of her. She had been opened from sternum to pelvis, her insides carefully arranged around her body in a pattern that hurt to perceive, some kind of symbol or sign that seemed to writhe in his peripheral vision, changing when he wasn't looking directly at it. Her organs formed spirals and geometric shapes that suggested meaning just beyond comprehension, a language written in flesh and blood. Her face was untouched, eyes wide and staring at the canopy above, mouth frozen in a silent scream, but her lips moved slightly, forming words without sound. "Run! It's already inside you, run!" Garrett vomited, scrambling backward on his hands and knees. His hand brushed something hard. A rock, fist-sized and sharp, covered in lichen that felt uncomfortably warm and seemed to pulse under his palm. He grabbed it instinctively, and nearby, noticed a thick branch that had been sharpened to a point, as if something had deliberately prepared weapons for this moment. The slapping, wet sounds were coming closer. Garrett stood, rock clutched in his trembling hand, the makeshift spear gripped in his other fist. He turned to face the thing. It stood 10 feet away, head tilted at an angle that would have snapped a normal person's neck. In the moonlight, he could see that its costume wasn't a costume at all, but skin. Layers and layers of human skin stitched together with black thread, faces and hands and other parts forming a patchwork of horror. He recognized some of the faces, hikers who had gone missing over the years, their features preserved in the creature's hideous tapestry. It moved toward him with that broken, lurching gait, and as it came closer, Garrett could hear the sound of the stitching tearing and repairing itself, the skin shifting and rearranging as if alive. Garrett didn't run, couldn't run. Something inside him had snapped, broken like Silas's neck, like Dalton's windpipe. When the clown reached for him with those impossibly jointed fingers, Garrett ducked under its grasp and drove the rock into its face with all his strength. The impact caved in the grotesque nose tumor, which burst like a cyst, spraying black fluid that burned where it touched Garrett's skin. The creature staggered backward, and Garrett followed, bringing the rock down again and again. But it wasn't enough. The thing kept coming, its wounds sealing themselves with wet, sucking sounds. Roaring with desperate fury, Garrett dropped the stone and gripped the sharpened branch like a spear. He thrust it forward with both hands, driving the point deep into the clown's chest. The wood penetrated the patchwork skin with a sound like tearing leather, sinking in until Garrett's hands touched the creature's torso. But instead of blood, the wound vomited forth a stream of those writhing things. Not worms, not insects, but something between and beyond. Things that had too many legs and no legs at all. Things with tiny human faces that screamed as they spilled out. The clown's painted smile faltered for the first time, becoming a confused frown, as if it couldn't understand what was happening to it. Garrett twisted the branch like a corkscrew, feeling it catch on what might have been ribs or might have been something else entirely. The painted face began to crumble like old plaster, revealing not a skull but a hollow cavity, filled with more of the writhing things. They poured out onto the ground, and where they touched the earth, the grass blackened and died. Still not satisfied, Garrett retrieved the rock and continued his assault. alternating between the spear and the stone, driving the creature back step by step. Each impact made wet, crunching sounds, like stepping on beetles or crushing rotten fruit. The clown's movements became increasingly erratic, its limbs twitching and jerking as if the controlling intelligence was fragmenting. Finally, with a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire, the clown's body collapsed in on itself like a deflated balloon. The skin suit fell to the ground in tatters, expelling a noxious gas that made Garrett's eyes water and his lungs burn. The writhing thing scattered into the darkness, disappearing into cracks in the earth and hollow logs, but Garrett could hear them moving under the ground, spreading outward like a contamination. Garrett stood there, panting, the branch still gripped in white-knuckled hands. The clown thing was just a pile of rotting skin now, already beginning to dissolve into a puddle of black ichor that bubbled and hissed as it ate into the earth. But as he watched, the puddle began to move, flowing toward him with deliberate purpose. Garrett stumbled backward, but not before some of the fluid splashed onto his boots, immediately eating through the leather and beginning to burn his feet. He stumbled back toward the trail, found it by pure chance or cosmic joke. His pack was where he'd dropped it, though it had been opened and rifled through. Inside, his car keys were missing, but he found them eventually. They had been carefully arranged in the shape of a pentagram on a nearby rock. His phone showed no signal, but the flashlight worked, casting a sickly yellow beam that seemed to make the shadows deeper rather than dispelling them. He walked-crawled the 7 miles back to the trailhead, expecting at any moment to hear those wet, slapping sounds behind him. The forest watched him go, and he could feel intelligence in that observation, as if the trees themselves had eyes. Occasionally, he glimpsed other figures moving parallel to his path, more clowns, or perhaps the same one, somehow reconstituted, following him like a pack of wolves. His car was still there, alone in the dark parking area, but the windshield had been painted with symbols in what looked like blood. He fumbled with the keys, managed to get the door open, collapsed inside. The engine turned over on the first try, a miracle, but as he drove away, his rearview mirror showed the parking lot filled with pale figures waving goodbye. It wasn't until he reached the first gas station, fluorescent lights like salvation, that he stopped. His hands were still shaking as he called 911, though the phone seemed strangely warm against his ear, and he could swear he heard whispers in the static between rings. The police found the bodies, or what remained of them. The official report blamed a bear attack, traumatic injuries, consistent with a large predator, they said. Mental trauma causing hallucinations, they said. The search teams reported feeling, quote, uneasy in that section of forest, and several officers reported equipment malfunctions and strange sounds. But officially, it was just nature being cruel. Garrett didn't argue. He knew what he'd seen, but he also knew what would happen if he insisted on the truth. They never found any trace of the clown, but they did find other things. Old things buried in the forest floor, bones arranged in patterns, cave paintings that hurt to look at directly. Evidence of rituals stretching back centuries, maybe millennia. The area was quietly closed to public access, though the official reason given was environmental concerns. Garrett moved to another state, another life. He worked, ate, slept, pretended to be human. But sometimes, late at night, he would wake to find his sheets damp with a clear fluid that burned his skin. Sometimes, in the mirror, he caught glimpses of black things swimming in his own eyes. Sometimes, his joints ached in ways that suggested they were bending in new directions. The burns on his feet never healed properly, remaining as weeping sores that occasionally wiggled as if something lived beneath the flesh. 6 months after the mountains, Garrett understood the truth that had been crawling through his veins since that night. The clown hadn't been the source. It had been a vessel, a carrier. Those writhing things hadn't fled into the forest. Some had, yes, but others had found a new host. They had entered through his wounds, burrowed under his skin while he fought for his life. His reflection smiled at him with too many teeth. The transformation would be complete soon. He could feel it in the way his skin was starting to loosen, to peel at the edges, could feel it in the hunger that grew stronger each day, not for food, but for something else, for others, for their skin, their fear, their beautiful, breakable bodies. He had become a carrier now, ready to spread the infection to new victims. Garrett Morse had killed the clown in the mountains. But some things don't need to be alive to spread. Some things just need a host. In his apartment bathroom, Garrett carefully applied white grease paint to his changing face, his fingers, now bearing too many joints, steady and sure. The red smile he painted extended beyond the corners of his mouth, following the lines he'd carved there last night with a kitchen knife. The pain had been exquisite, a reminder that he was still capable of feeling something other than hunger. Outside, the city sprawled with millions of potential friends to play with. The thing that had been Garrett Morse opened its door and stepped into the night, no longer running from the horror but becoming it, spreading it, nurturing it, like a parent tends a child. Behind him, on the bathroom floor, lay the shed skin of his former self, already beginning to writhe with new life as the creatures inside prepared for their next phase of reproduction. In the mountains, in a clearing 7 miles from anywhere, something laughed without sound. New trees were already growing from the spot where the clown had fallen, twisted and wrong, their fruit pulsing wetly in the darkness. The cycle continued.
If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.